everybody and welcome to Flock Talk. Today we're going to be going over a sort of guide to how to create a successful training session with your bird. So there's quite a few things when it comes to training that often go overlooked or aren't ever really considered when it comes to training a bird. There's all sorts of tiny finicky details down to the tiniest changes in their body language and behavior, to controlling their motivators, how you get them to be motivated, how to make sure you're marking exactly when you're rewarding them correctly, and there's all sorts of these tiny little segments of training that lots of people don't really quite know or have never heard of before. And so we're going to go through a whole ton of information today of all of those tiny little things that maybe you've never heard of before or never really considered, so that way you can set up your bird to have the best success possible when it comes to training. So the first thing we want to do when it comes to training is understanding what motivates our animals. That's the way that we're going to get them to do behaviors, is we're going to have to figure out what works best for them. Now, the most common rewards for birds is going to be sunflower seeds or flax. And while that's great and all, not every bird is the same. What you're going to find is that some birds really love millet, other birds really love seeds, some birds love dried fruit. It's going to be different, but that doesn't mean that food rewards are the only motivators that birds will work for. And this is super crucial, especially when it comes to something like taming a bird. Because if you're working with a bird that is not familiar with hands and doesn't like people, how are you going to expect to be able to feed them a treat if they're scared of you? How are you going to create something that the bird wants without you actually having to physically hand them something? And so that's where we kind of have to think about motivators aside from food. Now, birds, especially like kikes and other little clownish animals, they tend to prefer physical interaction, excitement, loud noises, you jumping up and down, playing with a toy a lot more than they will food. And that's something that a lot of people don't consider, is not every reward has to be food. With ZB back here, she absolutely loves me, she loves hanging out with me, so a lot of the time when I ask her to recall, I don't have to give her a treat, I just have to give her some attention, and that is rewarding enough for her that it's still reinforcing the behavior. So, how do you know what sort of motivators your bird likes? How are you going to figure out what is going to drive them the best? And the best way to figure this out is to just experiment. When it comes to food, the easiest thing you can do is set out a bunch of different treats, mix them all up in a dish, and just watch your bird. The treats that your bird picks out first, whatever seeds or pellets or whatever the heck they like, whatever they pick out first is the food that they're going to like the best. And that reward is going to be what you use for most of your training sessions. And whatever they pick out second, you'll want to keep there as well, because there's this really great feature of training called rewards and jackpots. So the difference between a reward and a jackpot is the context in which it's used. Now, a reward is just the basic reinforcer you're giving your bird to teach them to repeat the behavior. A jackpot is something you give them when a random occurrence happens where they do something incredibly well. So take for example, if you were target training a bird and you're just giving them, say, a millet seed for slowly progressing towards touching that target stick. That's great. Now if the bird were all of a sudden decide to stick their head out and touch the stick, which is the desired behavior, you would give them something 1,000 times better than that, because you want that to repeat. You absolutely want them to know that what they just did was brilliant, and they want to repeat that because they know that treat that they just got was fantastic and they would love it again. So jackpots don't always necessarily have to be a different kind of seed. With my birds, I will use millet as kind of the base treat, or I'll use maybe sunflower seeds as the base treat, and then what you can do is give them more. So when they do something that was absolutely fantastic, you can give them a larger seed, you can give them a couple of seeds, you can give them a treat that they like even better than those. You just have to make that moment extremely spectacular and memorable for them, because that jackpot is what is going to show them that what they just did was absolutely correct, and they're going to be more likely to repeat that behavior in the future. So how do we let the bird know when they've done something right? Giving them a treat is great, but by the time you've actually handed that treat to them, they've done a lot of other things between the time they did the correct behavior and the time they've reached for that treat. A lot of different behaviors and movements and sounds have occurred. So how is the bird supposed to know exactly what they did correctly? And that is where bridge devices come into play. Now, a bridge device is simply a sound or a cue that lets the bird know exactly when a moment has happened that we want them to repeat. And how we do that is usually with a clicker. Now, I've got two different types of clickers. I've got a box clicker and I've got a closed button clicker. This one I like to use for more close interactive things because it's a little quieter. So if I'm sitting this close to the bird and I click it, I know it's not going to be startling or fearful for them, and I find the buttons a little easier to press. Now this one I'll use for more long distance things because it's quite a bit louder and I have very, very tiny birds. So if I'm doing flight training or recall or anything like that, where I can be clicking the clicker far away from them, I will use this one because I know it'll be loud and they'll be able to hear it from anywhere in the room. So what exactly is the point of the clicker? And the point of it is basically the exact reaction I'm getting from ZB right now. You can see how much she loves this thing. She loves the sounds that it makes, she loves that it's there, because she knows that this means there's going to be a treat. So what we do in order to get a bird to this point where she loves this clicker and wants to be around it and shows this level of excitement, because she knows this means, hey, training is about to happen, is through clicker recognition. Now clicker recognition, when it comes to a bird who's never met a clicker before, is basically clicking it and instantly giving them a treat. And when I say instantly, I mean I want that treat in your fingers in front of their face, and I want a click and a hand as soon as possible. You want the gap between the click and the treat to be as small as possible, because that is what's going to tell the bird that the click means food is coming. And that understanding is what you need in order to train as precisely as possible. So once you have your bird to a point where you can click the clicker and you'll see a change in their body language, you can see how ZB started to kind of peer around there and look for where the treat was, that's when you know that your bird understands exactly what the click means. Get off my ear, please. Thank you. Sweet little bird. So that sort of response is when we know it's okay to start implementing clicking into other bits of training. So the reason why this click is so important to training is because of how precise it is at marking when they've done a correct behavior. When you're trying to teach a bird who can't speak English what to do, it's really hard for them to understand what we want, and this click lets them know that that exact moment was right, and they will be more likely to repeat what that click just marked the more and more repetitions we get at it, and the more they understand what this means. So understanding what this click means is what's going to mean the difference between the bird not knowing what's going on and knowing exactly when they've done something correctly. You absolutely can train without a clicker, but it does make it take a little bit longer just because that communication is not bridge. And that's why these devices are called bridge devices, because you are bridging that communication barrier. You are getting the bird to a point where you have a universal language here. You have a concept that they understand. They know that this means food, this means correct. And so having them understand what this means bridges that communication barrier and makes this understanding of training that much easier. So you've got your bird clicker trained, you know exactly what motivators and treats work best for them, and you're ready to start training. So what's the best trick to teach? What's the first thing your bird should learn that's easiest for them? What's going to help set the pace for all the other tricks your bird can learn in the future? And the answer to that is target training. Target training is one of the simplest and easiest concepts for any animal to learn. It is the thing that almost every trainer will universally teach any species before moving on to more complex tricks. And all target training is orienting any part of their body towards an object. In this case with birds, it's most often their beak towards the end of a stick. With my birds, what I use for a target stick is just a little wooden chopstick. You don't need anything special or fancy that has a bright red ball on the end of it. All you need is a simple straight object that you can hold that the bird can learn to target to. So what would be the point of this? All you're doing is teaching a bird to touch their beak to a stick. How is this going to help you in any way teach your bird how to play fetch, fly to you on command, or play dead? How on earth is touching a stick gonna get you there? And the answer to this is that target training actually played the base for every single one of those concepts. Target training is what helped the bird move their body in the way that we want them to in order to get that behavior to happen. And the other reason for this is that your bird can't do things that complex right off the bat. It's going to be really confusing for them because your bird has never done training before. They don't know what you're asking of them. They don't quite understand how to work for a reward yet. They don't know what you want. And target training is the simplest way to start to get that concept into their minds and get your bird to understand working for a reward. So the next thing that's really important to take note of when you're training a bird is how long you're training them for. Birds have an attention span of around 10 to 15 minutes. Now many birds can go way longer than that, but the important thing is that we do not want to be training them for so long that they're getting stressed out or tired or frustrated by the end of a training session. That's the last thing you want to do, and that can have absolutely devastating effects when it comes to teaching a bird tricks. If the last memory you had with someone was being tired and miserable and frustrated, you're not going to want to come back and do that again the next day. It doesn't matter how much food they fed you. If you had a bad time and that's the last thing you remember, you're not going to want to come back, and neither is your bird. If they're like Mia right now and they're excited and they're bouncing around and they're wanting to be here, you know you can keep training even if you've been there for 15 minutes already. But if your bird is starting to puff up, they're starting to beat grind and get distracted and look around, it's probably time to end that session because your bird isn't very motivated to train anymore. They're not interested, and if you keep pushing it past that, your bird's going to start getting frustrated and they're not going to want to come back. So with birds who have never trained before, I don't recommend exceeding training sessions longer than 5 minutes. Even if you make what you think is zero progress, just doing that 5 minutes is starting to shape your bird into understanding what a training session is. And you can't expect them to jump straight into 15, 20 minutes, half an hour when they don't understand what's going on and they've never done this before. Yes, hi. But when you've got a bird who's been doing things quite a bit longer and they've done those 5-minute sessions, they're more willing to stay longer because they understand what's going on, they're having fun, and they know that training is one of the best parts of their day. I certainly know it is for my guys. So taking that time just to do those short sessions in the beginning does pay off in the long run. You don't want to be forcing them past those boundaries and getting them stressed out and tired at the end of every session. So the next most important factor of training is utilizing the features of positive reinforcement and negative punishment. Now, as soon as I say the word punishment, I know a lot of people are going to be panicking in the comments below, so I want to clarify what these terms mean in terms of training terminology. Positive means adding something to an environment, and negative means removing. So positive reinforcement means adding something beneficial that's positive to the environment, and negative punishment means taking something positive out of the environment so the bird acknowledges it as not being an enjoyable experience. What is wrong in terms of punishment is positive punishment, and that is doing something to the bird that is adding something to the environment that is intended to scare them, hurt them, or cause other adverse effects. Now, negative punishment can absolutely be utilized in fantastic ways, and an example of this is like a 2-second timeout. Now that doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're a bird who's excited and happy and then they've done something wrong, if you take 2 seconds to put your hands behind your back, just removing the treats from the environment, your bird's gonna know that something's not right, they don't like the fact that the treat's left, and they're not gonna repeat that behavior. Now, I would only really use punishments when it comes to things that are really dangerous, and that means birds that are presenting aggressive behaviors. If you're training a trick to a bird and they're just not understanding what's happening, I'm not going to pull all the treats away because the bird isn't doing anything wrong per se. They're just not understanding what's happening, and that's my fault. If I'm not teaching the bird correctly, then how are they supposed to understand what's happening? I can't do a punishment towards them for something that I'm not communicating. It's my job to make sure that the bird is learning. It's not my job to punish the bird for not understanding my poor teaching. Largely what we want to focus on is positive reinforcement, which is a term that a lot of you are familiar with, and this means adding something beneficial to the environment to show the bird that they did something correctly. And in this case, what we usually end up giving them is a sunflower seed or a piece of millet. You're adding a beneficial thing, the treat, the sunflower seed, to the environment. I'm going to reiterate this point one more time because I want this to be extremely clear. Do not utilize positive punishment on a bird or most animals in that matter. It is simply not needed. What you can utilize as a punishment is a negative punishment, removing something positive from the environment that the bird isn't going to enjoy and acknowledge that they did something wrong without psychological or physical damage. Now, extreme forms of positive punishments would be examples like striking an animal or doing something that is going to cause them physical harm. That is kind of typically what you would acknowledge a punishment to be, is physically hurting, yelling, scaring, doing other sorts of harm to an animal that's going to make them afraid. That is not the response that we want. The response that we want is the animal to go, oh, I shouldn't have done that, my fun thing left. I would like that thing to come back. Okay, I will stop doing that so I can have that fun thing. That is the response that we want, and that is negative punishment. In a case with birds, what I would use for negative punishment, if I was training with Zeeby and she started to get too excited, she started jumping up on me and getting aggressive or something, I wouldn't hurt her, I wouldn't yell at her, I wouldn't throw something at her, I wouldn't spray her with a bottle. All I would do is take the treats away and hide them behind my back. And I wouldn't look at her, I would just stand and wait for her to calm down. As soon as she calms down, I bring the positive stuff back into the environment. And that tells her, hey, when I'm being aggressive or grumpy, all of my food leaves. I don't want my treats to leave, I love my treats. please let me have those back, I'll be a good bird. That's basically the response that we want to get. We don't want to be doing anything that's going to cause damage or fear or psychological harm to the animals that we're working with, because why would we ever want them to view us that way? Not only is it in some regard morally wrong, but why would you want an animal to have to fear you for some reason? We're working with them, we're trying to teach them. We shouldn't be giving them any sort of reason to not want to be with us. Now the final point I'm going to address here is progression and the pace at which you progress with your bird. Now what this means is that expecting them to travel too quickly is going to have some bad side effects for you. You should be letting your birds set the pace for all of your training sessions. And this is something I reiterate over and over and over again in every training tutorial I have ever made, is that you need to pay attention to their body language and you need to progress at your bird's pace. Now, the pace at which your bird sets is pretty easy to tell because your bird won't know what's happening if you're progressing too fast. And what you'll find is that your bird will start getting distracted and running away and not having a fun time if they don't know what's happening. So the easiest thing for you to do is start off with the smallest progressions you can and see if the bird understands. If they catch on to those concepts super fast, you can move on to the next step. The smaller steps you go in, the easier it is for your bird to understand where you're wanting them to go with this until you can reach the final goal. Do not expect your bird to be able to jump from 0 to 100 in the span of one session. Take those tiny steps. It'll feel super slow to you because you know what you want them to do, but they don't. They don't understand your language, they barely understand how to work with us and how to train. It's just going to take time to start building this until you'll notice that your bird will start learning more and more quickly. The number of comments I get of people who say that their bird is stupid or their bird won't learn or their bird will never be able to do these things absolutely breaks my heart. Because your bird is not stupid. They can and they will learn all of these concepts that you guys have seen my birds learn. And the reason why I know this is because they're all capable of it. They all have the same physiology that will allow them to do it. It just takes time and it's on you to be able to teach them. It is not your bird's fault if they don't understand. And the reason why this usually happens is because you're expecting too much out of them right off the bat. You need to be taking it slowly in the tiniest steps you can. Before you start training, I highly recommend breaking down the trick you want them to learn into the tiniest steps possible. Say target training, for example, because it's the easiest one again. You have the stick, you have the bird. End goal, the bird touches the stick. Well, what are the steps between that? In order for your bird to touch the stick, they'd have to look at it first, right? Now that might seem stupid and small to you, but if you have a bird that is just having a stick shoved in its face, how would it know, right? By getting that moment where they just look at it, you're teaching the bird that what you want them to do has to do with the stick that they're looking at. And that's where you're going to start to get to those points where the bird will start to turn their body towards it. They'll take half a step towards it. They'll shimmy over to it. They'll reach for it until they finally touch it. Those tiny little progressions are how your bird is going to learn. And taking those small steps and moving as your bird wants to learn is how you're going to get to that end goal where they've properly understood a concept. So that'll about do it for this video. Those are some of the basic things that I think are often not heard of or misunderstood when it comes to training. If any of you guys are having problems out there where you're finding you're getting stuck with teaching your bird anything, I hope that some of these tips have been helpful for you and that you'll be able to find new ways to work with your bird after considering some of these things. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video helped you out in one way or another. Thank you all, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!